Back on Star Wars Day 2023, I landed a post of Vice President of Global Revenue Enablement for a software company. I had a long conversation with Mrs. Norf. We decided it was going to be a really good opportunity, so we pulled the trigger on it. In February 2024, my role was eliminated. Like many I know, it wasn't the first time that roles have been cut due to a company restructure, but for me, this would make the third time. I'd applied for the best part of 120 different roles in the field and also the adjacent fields to what I did. Most companies came back to me with an automated thanks but no thanks email. Others just plain ghosted me, like they'd fallen off the face of the planet. Our experience in job hunting was nothing short of grim, very grim. We did what we could by reducing our outgoings immediately. The nice-to-have monthly subscriptions all stopped. I sold my motorcycle. Needless to say, we needed to ensure that our pounds and pennies stretched as far as possible. So the question that I posed to myself was, what now? What do you do next, Norf? That was me 2 years ago. As of today, I would say that I'm a successful solopreneur running a business called True Norf. And for all intents and purposes, it's me, myself, and I. I will say that my measure of success is keeping my kids in Wi-Fi. Effectively, I'm a freelance video content creator and presenter working mainly in the AIDC, or auto identification and data capture, or the supply chain business for short. And I was really happy with what I was doing and never considered rebooting my company. However, I had to. You may ask yourself, so Norf, how did you get here? Well, let me take you back to the turn of 2024. Grab a cup of something good and I'll tell you all about it. I was leading a mainly superb team of sales enablers in the corporate space who masterminded and delivered a really successful company sales kickoff, both in the US and in EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. At the end, I was absolutely shattered because everything that we did took a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of resource to stand this thing up. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to take some time off and spend some time with my family, some real quality time with my family. I booked a week off in February 2024, and on the Friday, I noticed that I got a 15-minute call drop into my diary directly from my boss. And the time of the meeting was the first day of my week off. On the call was my boss, who I would say was a boss and not a leader, in my humble opinion, and the HR director, who was fantastic. Some 4 minutes in, 20-something years of corporate life was over. Just like that. This is the story of what happened next and why. Genuinely, for me, it was the best thing that has ever happened to me. I'd spent the best part of 3 decades building a career in corporate technology, product management, marketing, sales enablement, and I would say that I was really good at it. I was well known in the industry, I had a title, a great team I worked with, and a LinkedIn profile that said, with humility of course, this is one of the really good guys. Corporate life gave me a superb start and excellent skills, and I'd not be the person today without the years that I'd spent in different roles in the companies that I've worked for. The challenge with corporate life is the perception of security, and for me, that felt borrowed. The identity was rented, and when the lease runs out, you find out very quickly that you're on your own. In my last role, I worked for a large US software company, a global organization, the kind that you would feel safe working for. And then one day, with pretty much zero warning, I was no longer needed. Candidly, the company itself doesn't matter, because what happened to me is what's happened to thousands of people in every industry at every level. The feeling, though, is universal. Shock set in. Then silence, then anger, then this weird sensation of, floating. Like the ground that I was standing on for decades had suddenly vanished. I also felt fairly ill-prepared for this next part. And you may say, well, it would clearly be the lack of money. I'd like to say, well, not just yet. That did come eventually, but that wasn't the first thing that happened. In the first few days, the thing that really hit me was the identity. I'd been in sales, or revenue enablement, as it's now called, for so long that I was confused who Norf really was without the company behind him. The email address had their brand on it, my calendar was theirs, and my purpose every morning came from a job description that somebody else wrote. And I remember waking up the day after my redundancy all went down, and there was nothing. There was a void. There was silence. No email to respond to, no calls to join, and no reason to be at my desk ready to be working with coffee in hand at 8 a.m. For about a week, and I'll be candid, I just sat in it. The grief was real. People don't talk about it enough, in my view. You grieve the structure, the routine, the version of yourself that existed inside that building and that global structure. And then there's the shame too, especially at the age that I was. And when this happened, I was 51 at the time. You're supposed to be the senior person in the room. You're supposed to be the one that has it all sorted out, the one giving advice and counsel, not the one updating their CV and resume at midnight, wondering what the blazes is going to happen next. Here, though, is where the story changed. About 10 days in, maybe 2 weeks or so, something shifted. And obviously this happens differently for everyone, but for me, it started with a question, a really simple question, almost an irritating question. And it was, if you could do anything at all, what would it be, Norf? I'd always wanted to fly helicopters since I was a kid, inspired by Blue Thunder and Airwolf that came on the TV, literally a childhood dream that I've been putting off for the best part of 40 years. Career, family, money, responsibility, no dogs or animals at the time. However, there was always a reason not to follow my dream. And here I was, with no job, no title, no excuse, not very much money, though the flight story does come a little bit later on. However, here and now, I needed to bring some money in, as my redundancy wouldn't last much longer. The path I followed surprised me a little bit because it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a dramatic career change, though it was something I'd been doing in the margins of my corporate life for about 30 or so years. I'd take conversations full of data, full of complexity, full of people talking in acronyms and TLAs, 3-letter abbreviations, and make them human. I'm an engineer by trade and have one of these skills whereby you could take really complex things and explain them so everybody in the room could understand. To translate what was actually happening and put it all into a story that the room could feel and walk away with, not just understand. And all that happened in the enterprise supply chain industry that I serve. Whether it was a logistics breakdown that was costing a business millions, or a mobility program that was quietly transforming how people worked in their day-to-day activities, I could find the human thread running through it all, and I could pull on that thread. I have examples where I've done this in sales meetings, boardrooms, and on stage to hundreds or possibly a handful of thousands of people. I embedded sales learnings into enablement programs across the globe, and every time I handed that capability back to whoever was paying my salary, and then simply moved on to the next thing or the next brief that was waiting for me in my inbox. And then sitting there in Tight Spot Studios in the quiet of the first few weeks after my redundancy, I thought, what if this is a thing? What if this skill that I've been lending out for the last 30 years is actually a business? What if I could monetize this? The supply chain, or specifically the AIDC industry, I think is one of the most misunderstood, underleveraged, and frankly underestimated spaces in the business world. The stories happening inside global logistics organizations, inside mobility management, inside the movement of goods and people, and the visibility in all of that is just extraordinary, and it's fascinating to be in. And the stories are just not being told in the way that I think they should land, and the way that they resonate. And here I was, no job, no title, no briefs from somebody else, just a very clear sense that there was a gap, a big gap, and that I was exactly the right person to fill that gap. So I leaned hard into being the person who helped bring a lot of these exciting stories to life. And that's when True North stopped being a vague idea and it started to become a direction, a reboot of the company that I'd had some 10 years previous. So let's get practical, because I want this 51st chapter series not to just be about theory, but about how you can actually do something practical when the rug gets pulled out from beneath you. So here's a framework, and this is the framework that I used, and I want to share it with you. I call it my 30-day reset. Now, I'm not saying that this is the gold standard by any stretch of the imagination, but it's what helped me rebuild and recover from redundancy. And it's built around 3 simple phases. The 30-day framework is based around 3 letters, F.A.B, and they stand for feel, audit, and build. Days 1 to 10 roughly, this is the feel it phase. Don't perform, clearly don't panic as much as you can. Don't immediately fire off job applications like I did to prove that you're okay. Give yourself permission and time to process the loss. Speak to somebody that you trust or a group of people that you trust. One of the key things that I did is I used a notepad and I wrote a lot of these things down. I used a pencil because I quite like using pencils, but do whatever you feel is necessary. But the point is, write this all down. Days 11 to 20 are the A phase, or the audit phase. Now this is where you've got to really figure out and think about what you actually do. Not what your job title says, but what do you genuinely do? What can you deliver? Who trusts what you do? What would people pay you to do tomorrow if you asked them? Write an honest inventory of your skill set, your relationships, and your experience. This is the real asset base, and you'll be using this to build what you're going to deliver in the future. Lastly, roughly days 21 to 30 are the B phase, the build it phase. 1 conversation per day. Not pitching, just connecting. 1 piece of content that shows what you know, 1 small bet on the future version of yourself. The point here is not to have it all figured out. The point is to be in motion, to be continuously investing in what you're going to do next. The thing is, motion creates clarity. Sitting still just potentially creates more fear. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that redundancy is easy. It's absolutely not. Neither am I going to sit here and tell you that the 51st chapter is all sunshine, rainbows, and everything smells of roses. Absolutely not. It's hard. It's really hard. And there are days that are genuinely difficult. The financial pressure is real. The self-doubt and imposter syndrome of reinventing yourself at this age is very, very real. However, here's what I know to be true nearly 2 years in. I have never, not once, ever wished that I was back at that corporate role. Not the salary, not the title, not the perceived safety, not some of the people or the bosses that I used to work for. What I've found on the other side is something that 3 decades of employment never gave me. Direction. My own direction. Not somebody else's roadmap. My own 51st chapter, if you will. And if you're watching this because you've had that call, or you feel something coming around the corner, or you're sitting on a deferred dream for longer than you care to admit, this series I've created for you. What I would ask is not to scroll past this. This bit really does matter, and I'll give you 3 steps. Step number 1 is write down 1 deferred dream that you've been putting off. The thing that comes to mind before you talk yourself out of it. Yeah, that one. Step 2, write down the real reason why you haven't done it. Not the excuse, the real reason. Thirdly, keep yourself accountable and set a date. Not soon, not this year, a specific date to take that first step, no matter how small it is. And then, if you're willing, drop it into the comments. I would love to support you on it. If anything in this message resonated, please do feel free to share it. There may be someone that you know who may be in need of hearing it, or someone who just got that call, or who's been scared to begin to write down their own next chapter. Thank you so much for getting this far. I really do appreciate you watching to this point. In episode 2, we'll explore how to figure out what the next move is and how to dial some of those things in, and you may be surprised at some of the things that you get to unlock. This is the 51st chapter, and though it's still being written, we get to use the shock we felt to fuel our forward momentum.